So imagine you're a mathematician. You've been awake for, I don't know, 72 hours straight.
Oh, wow. Running on just sheer adrenaline at that point.
Exactly. Adrenaline and probably some incredibly stale cold coffee. And you are obsessively working on the Solani conjecture.
Right, which is this notoriously impossible problem.
Yeah, it's all about null spaces, the geometry of emptiness. And suddenly, boom, you see the breakthrough. You literally solve the equation of a lifetime.
Best feeling in the world for a mathematician.
Oh, absolutely. So you reach your hand out to write the number 0 at the end of the proof, and the space just remains totally blank.
And to be clear, we're not talking about a dry pen here.
No. It's not a dry pen. It's not a broken keyboard. The actual conceptual entity of 0 has just quit its job.
It just walked off the set.
Yeah. Welcome to this deep dive, because our mission today is to explore a wild narrative excerpt called The Weight of 0. And it poses this really mind-bending premise. What if foundational mathematical concepts aren't just passive, dead tools that we use?
Right. What if they're active entities?
Exactly. Active entities, they can actually suffer fatigue, go on strike, and demand acknowledgement.
It's just a phenomenal thought experiment because it really forces us to look down and question the very ground we're standing on. We treat numbers like they're just inanimate bricks. We expect our foundational systems to be totally objective, totally silent, and to just tirelessly hold up the entire building of human knowledge without ever cracking.
Okay, let's unpack this, because the boundaries of this specific glitch are incredibly bizarre.
They really are.
So the mathematician in our story, Vera Kaslan, she starts testing this disappearance. And she realizes 0 isn't physically erased from the universe.
Right. It's a functional issue.
Yeah, like if she types out her mother's phone number, the decorative zeros show up perfectly fine. Or if she writes an essay on, the historical invention of 0 by ancient civilizations, the word types out normally.
Because in those cases, it's just text. It's not doing the heavy lifting.
Exactly. But the exact moment 0 is required to function mathematically, like as a placeholder, to turn a 1 into a 10.
Mm-hmm.
Or as an additive identity in algebra, or a limit in a calculus equation, it just refuses to materialize. The computer keystrokes register, the character count goes up, but the space on the screen remains completely empty.
And if we step back and connect this to the bigger picture, the stakes of a functional strike by 0 are, literally apocalyptic.
Or total collapse.
Yeah. Vera quickly realizes that if 0 ceases to carry its mathematical load, the entire edifice of modern civilization just evaporates overnight.
Right.
Place value systems disappear, meaning we lose the ability to even write or comprehend large numbers. Algebra dissolves entirely because finding the 0 of a function is its structural spine.
Yeah, and calculus too, right?
Exactly. Calculus is the mathematics of continuous change. Without 0, it becomes totally incoherent.
And it goes way beyond just the chalkboard. The physical systems of the real world rely on that math. Like quantum physics requires the ground state of 0 particle number.
Which is the absolute baseline energy of the universe.
Right. If that concept breaks, our understanding of physics breaks. Global economics completely halts because modern finance is built on double-entry accounting.
Everything has to balance.
Every asset must have a corresponding liability and equity that balances out to 0. If you can't balance to 0, you have no banks, no stock market, no digital computing. Everything just stops.
So this realization hits Vera and her colleague Yusuf, who's a probabilist, by the way. They realize they aren't dealing with some weird software bug or a neurological break. They are dealing with a foundation that has structurally buckled.
Which is terrifying.
It is. And it immediately shifts their focus to the mechanism of the collapse. Like, if a mathematical concept left its post, what actual forces drove it away?
And this sends Vera spiraling into the philosophical archives. She unearths this really obscure 1931 footnote written by a logician named Heinrich Proll.
Right, the fatigue theory.
Yeah. Proll proposed a theory called begriffliche Ermüdung, which translates to conceptual fatigue. He suggested that concepts actively participate in their own meaning.
They aren't just passive switches waiting for a human to flip them.
Exactly. They're dynamic, load-bearing structures. And because they're dynamic, Proll theorized they can actually be worn down by overuse over centuries.
Now, I know you had some thoughts on this when we were preparing.
Yeah, I have to push back slightly here, because this is where my brain initially started to really short-circuit. How can an abstract number get tired?
It sounds a bit absurd at first glance.
It really does.
Yeah.
It feels like we're confusing the map with the territory. It sounds as absurd as claiming that the concept of gravity gets exhausted the more apples fall from trees in autumn. Gravity just is.
Well, Yusuf makes almost the exact same argument in the text when Vera pitches this to him.
Oh, really? So I'm in good company.
You are. But the leap Vera makes is formalizing Prall's vague philosophy into a really rigorous mathematical framework. She titles it conceptual weight.
Okay.
She clarifies that we shouldn't think of this as a psychological emotion. It's not like a number is feeling sad or sleepy.
Right. It's not taking a nap.
No, it is a quantifiable structural load. Vera actually creates an equation where a concept's weight is determined by 4 very specific variables.
Break those down for me.
Sure. First, frequency of use.
Makes sense.
Second, diversity of use, like how many entirely different fields pull on it.
Oh, okay.
Third is structural load. Basically, how catastrophic is it if the concept fails?
So the stakes.
Exactly. And fourth, substitutability. Can another concept step in and do its job?
Wow. Okay, and when you run 0 through that framework, it scores off the charts on every single metric.
Unprecedented levels.
Yeah, it's used constantly in every field. From calculating orbital mechanics to the digital timer on your microwave, it carries maximum structural load, and it has absolute 0 substitutability.
Right. There is no backup number for 0.
If you need a 0 and it's not there, you can't just borrow a fraction. It doesn't work.
And the historical context is really the nail in the coffin here, because for 1,400 years, 0 was carrying a massive load, but it was generally manageable.
Because humans are slow.
Right. Human minds and early mechanical machines calculate relatively slowly. But then the computational age arrived.
Oh, man.
Let's look at the physical reality of a modern microchip. You have hundreds of billions of transistors switching between 1 and 0 billions of times every single second across billions of devices worldwide.
It's staggering when you say it out loud.
It is. 0 was suddenly loaded past any historical threshold a concept had ever been subjected to. The sheer volume of digital logic simply crushed it.
Okay, but here's where it gets really interesting. Because the true tragedy of 0, at least according to Vera's research, isn't just that it's overworked by computers.
No, it's deeper than that.
It's something much more profound that she calls 0 loneliness. Think about 0's primary job as the additive identity. If you take 5 and add 0, you get 5.
Basic math.
Right. But for 0 to do its job perfectly in that equation, it must be completely invisible. It leaves no trace of itself on the other number.
It has to disappear to work?
Yes. It is carrying the weight of the digital and physical world, acting as this ultimate invisible stagehand. And its reward is to be entirely unnoticed by the audience. It is structurally required by the laws of mathematics to be unacknowledged.
And the better 0 performs, the less we perceive it.
Exactly.
So it didn't just walk off the job because the math was physically heavy. It left because the weight of being completely unseen while holding up the entire universe became structurally unbearable.
So if a concept gets tired and goes on strike, it can't just evaporate. You can't destroy a mathematical foundation any more than you can destroy matter or energy. So if 0 isn't on the page, where did it physically hide?
Well, Vera deduces that 0 retreated to the margins of mathematics, and she and Yusuf realize they have to draw a map to actually go find it.
A map of math.
Yeah. They conceptualize a literal mathematical coastline between the territory of presence, which consists of all our positive numbers, and the territory of absence, which is our negative numbers.
So 0 is the beach.
0 is the beach. It is the boundary line itself.
But because all their modern mathematical tools rely on 0 to even function, they can't use calculus or algebra to get to that beach.
Well, the tools are broken.
So they have to build a theoretical door using ancient 0-free mathematics. They use Roman numerals. They use early Greek geometry that operates entirely without coordinates.
Babylonian methods, too.
Right. They construct this formal mathematical bridge into the margin, into this space that formal logic implicitly asserts does not even exist.
And Vera crosses over into what she calls the null-interior.
And the way the source describes this place is absolutely stunning. I really want you to picture this. It is not some dark, empty, terrifying void.
Not at all.
It is a dense, thick space where absences are solid objects. Think of a brick wall. We normally think the bricks are the reality, right? And the mortar is just empty space or fill.
Yeah, just the gaps between the important stuff.
But when Vera enters the null-interior, the perspective flips completely. She realizes the mortar, the gaps, the pauses is actually a titanium frame.
The structure itself.
Yes. The silence in a piece of music. The microscopic gap between neurons in your brain. The space inside the letter O. These aren't empty voids. They are physical architectural structures holding up the math of the real world. 0 isn't a void. It is the scaffolding of reality.
And standing inside that Baroque topology of nothingness, Vera has this incredible realization. She is standing inside the very Solani conjecture she has spent 6 years trying to solve.
God, they give me chills.
The proof was never just a set of numbers, it was a physical location.
And that's where she finally encounters zero. And I don't know about you, but I fully expected her to find some massive, booming, intimidating mathematical god.
Like a titan holding up the sky.
Exactly. But she doesn't. She finds an entity no bigger than a child curled around itself.
Just profoundly exhausted.
Yeah. It has this distinct heavy quality of a worker who's been doing brutal manual labor for 14 centuries and has finally just sat down in the dirt, entirely unable to take another step.
And the negotiation that happens next is incredibly poignant. Because zero doesn't communicate with spoken words.
How could it?
Right. It communicates by showing Vera its structural history, just flashing the entirety of its invisible labor directly into her mind. And Vera understands instantly that she isn't there as some manager to demand it return to the assembly line.
Right, she can't force it.
So she asks what it needs to survive. And Zero's demand is surprisingly modest. It doesn't actually ask to stop working.
What does it want?
It simply wants to be counted.
It wants its invisible labor formally acknowledged by the architects of the system.
Exactly. It wants mathematicians to build a formal theory of its work. So Vera promises to finish her proof of the Solani conjecture, which will map the exact geometry of Zero's labor.
And to publish the formal theory of conceptual weight, so the whole world knows what it is doing.
Right. Zero accepts this promise.
Yeah.
And functionally, quietly, it returns to the human world.
So Vera sits back at her desk, writes a zero on a piece of paper, and there it is. The ink stays. The crisis is averted.
Sure.
Right, because of course the return of zero is only the beginning of a much larger story. Vera publishes her findings on conceptual weight, and it sparks this massive movement in the academic community. She puts together a specialized seminar with 6 brilliant students to expand the theory.
And they quickly realize zero isn't the only concept hiding out in the basement.
Oh boy.
The seminar students begin conducting what they call a weight audit on other foundational concepts across logic and mathematics. A logician student named Lena takes on the formal relation of equality, the equal sign, and she discovers that it is also in severe conceptual distress. It is buckling.
Now, when I first read this part, I was a little confused. Why would equality's weight be so high? It's used a lot, sure, but zero is invoked in every single microchip calculation billions of times a second. Quality surely has a lower frequency than zero.
Its raw frequency is lower, yes, but its structural strain is completely different. If zero is suffering from invisibility, equality is suffering from intense contradiction.
Think about how we use the equal sign. It is being violently stretched across totally incompatible domains. We force the concept of equality to mean perfect mathematical identicality in an algebra equation.
Right. 5 equals 5.
But then we use it in a computer database to mean bit-for-bit sameness. And then, and this is where it gets crazy, we use the exact same concept to represent profound moral and political parity in social justice arguments. We demand that 2 mathematically distinct human beings be treated as equal.
And this raises an incredibly important question about how our language impacts logic.
Right, because we use the same word.
Exactly. A computer requires absolute, unyielding sameness to execute an if-then logic loop. If A equals B, then proceed. But a philosopher requires moral equivalence despite obvious physical differences. The equal sign is essentially doing the splits across human thought.
That sounds painful.
It is. We're using the exact same foundation to hold up entirely different types of architecture, and the concept is exhausted from being pulled in opposite directions simultaneously.
So every time a legal argument about human rights invokes equality without defining it precisely, they are adding load to a concept that is already cracking under the strain of human history.
Precisely. Lina and another student, Amara, actually managed to visit equality's null-interior.
And what do they find?
They find it there, completely battered, just bruised and beaten. But equality refuses to leave its post.
Oh, wow. Why?
Not because it isn't tired, but because it knows its structural load is too critical. It knows that if it walks away, human civilization, computer logic, and every single argument for justice instantly falls apart.
It is heartbreaking. Equality stays because what it holds up cannot survive the fall.
Yeah. And just as the seminar is grappling with the tragedy of the equal sign, another student, Fatima Uzay, starts noticing terrifying anomalies in set theory proofs.
Oh no, what now?
She discovers that the empty set is starting to erode.
Okay, we should probably define the empty set real quick because it's a bit of a brain bender. It is the mathematical set that contains absolutely nothing.
Right.
It is the primal, foundational, blank canvas from which all other mathematical sets are constructed.
And what's fascinating here is the nature of the empty set's specific burden. The philosopher of the group, a student named Kofi, helps them articulate it. He says the empty set suffers from what he terms primordial loneliness.
Primordial loneliness.
Yeah. It is the condition that exists before presence. Its entire formal definition, its very reason for existing, requires it to be absolutely, perfectly empty and untouched.
But once again, the computational age ruined its existence.
Of course it did.
Think about what a computer is actually doing under the hood. Billions of times a second, an application initializes an empty array, or clears a database, or opens a blank document. It's essentially building a completely empty room just to prove the concept of a room exists, and doing it constantly. It is forcing contact upon the empty set.
Koki calls this ontological friction.
Ooh, I like that term.
Imagine being in a perfectly silent, totally dark sensory deprivation tank, which, by the way, is the only place you can survive. Now imagine someone tapping on the outside of the glass 1 billion times a second.
That sounds like torture.
Every single computational invocation is a tap on the glass. It's not formally adding an element to the set, so it's not breaking the math on paper, but it's bringing the relentless noise of human attention to a space that requires absolute silence.
Wow.
So the empty set isn't fatigued like zero. It is physically degrading from the sheer friction of billions of initializations.
And when Vera visits the empty set's interior, she realizes she can't even orient herself. It's a space that is prior to space, and her mere presence there compromises its emptiness.
It's an impossible situation.
It really is. We can't stop using computers, so we can't stop eroding the foundation. With all these pillars, zero, equality, the empty set, cracking under different types of modern strain, you really start to wonder how the entire mathematical edifice hasn't completely collapsed already.
Which brings us to the ultimate revelation of the text, and it's discovered in a very quiet moment back in Vera's office. Long after the crisis is over, Zero comes to visit her, completely unprompted.
Just drops in.
Yeah, and it shows her a hidden topology, a secret connection deep within the weight lattice between itself and the empty set.
And this hidden connection leads to what the team formally publishes as the seventh axiom.
Right. Up until this point, the dominant philosophical view was that mathematical concepts are monads.
Like isolated bubbles.
Exactly. A monad is a completely self-contained, isolated unit with no windows to the outside world. Zero is zero, equality is equality, and they never touch.
But the seventh axiom proves they aren't isolated at all.
No. They share boundaries deep in the null-interior. And through those boundaries, they transfer resources to one another.
So what does this all mean? When Vera looks at the connection between zero and the empty set, she realizes there is this beautiful asymmetrical exchange happening in the dark.
It really is beautiful.
The empty set is much older and heavier than zero. It provides zero with context. It gives zero its structural history and its defined place in the universe.
And in
return, zero gives the empty set company. Zero sits right at the boundary line, providing a steady presence that doesn't violate the empty set's absolute requirement for nothingness.
It fundamentally changes how we view the universe of logic. The foundations of mathematics aren't dead, inert pillars of stone. They are an active, living community.
A community.
Yes. They are transferring heat and load from high-weight areas to low-weight areas, sustaining each other, keeping each other alive in the dark without us ever knowing.
Let's synthesize this incredible journey we've just been on. We started with a quirky, surreal glitch, a mathematician unable to type a single number on a page.
Right.
And it unspooled into this profound realization that the foundational abstractions of our universe aren't just passive tools waiting in a toolbox. They are an inhabited space.
They are carrying a massive, quantifiable load.
Yes, and they require maintenance, awareness, and acknowledgement to survive.
Think about what this means for us right now, today. Every single time you open a blank spreadsheet, every time you use the calculator on your phone to split a bill, every time you type an equal sign in a line of code, you are resting your weight on an ancient, invisible architecture. An architecture that is working incredibly hard at unimaginable computational speeds to hold up your reality.
It honestly makes you want to whisper a little thank you every time you hit the zero key.
It really does.
But it also leaves us with a provocative final thought, something to really chew on as you go about the rest of your day. We've spent this time talking about how abstract mathematical concepts can experience the heavy, lonely burden of unacknowledged labor.
Yeah.
But look around your own life. What invisible foundational concepts in your personal relationships, in the dynamics of your workplace, or in the broader structure of your society are currently carrying a massive, unthanked load?
That is a great question.
Who or what is your structural zero? And how much longer can they carry that weight in silence before they, too, decide to simply step into the margins, break the clean, precise machinery of your daily routine, and disappear?